Alright, here today we have random player who's random Protoss and a Terran player who's picked Terran. Now we're going to speed through the intro a little bit here. The Protoss player is sending his probe across the map, is noticed by the Terran player, and is just kind of getting some scouting information here, dancing around the base, trying to wait it out and get some good scouting. The Terran player is doing the same. He has an SCV over here that the Protoss player is just kind of ignoring for now. He could chase it off, but it would just end up resulting in the same dance pattern except for in a different base. The Terran player has finished his first gateway, and the Protoss player, or I'm sorry, his first barracks, and the Protoss player his first gateway. Now, now we have the Zealot chasing around the SCV who's retreated out of the base. Marine chasing the probe. Quick command center here before the second barracks is up. Now, throughout all this dance, both players gleaned a lot of information about the build of the upcoming player's army. Here, the Protoss player sees that the other player is going for two barracks, so he's not going right away for a factory. He only had one gas up, which means he's probably not going for some type of gas-intensive build, aka Banshee Harass or lots of siege tanks to sit outside the Protoss player's base. So the Protoss player assumes it's safe to go ahead and finish his cybernetics core, start warp gate research, and build his second gateway. Now he also only has one gas, so he's probably going for a lighter ground mix focused mostly on Zealots, as once with charge they do a fairly good job versus Marines and Marauders. And Stalkers, of course, are hard countered by Marauders, which the Protoss player probably assumes the Terran player is going, as he did see two barracks. And double barracks Marauder research stimpack is a very common early push for Terran players versus Protoss, as Marauders are a hard counter to Stalkers, and before Zealots get charge, it's a pretty hard counter to them as well. Now both players just kind of building a very small force, just enough to kind of defend their gate. The Terran player adding a factory to the mix of his buildings. Throwing down a tech lab. Now he could be either going for his siege tank research, or since he's throwing a starport up, he could be aiming to switch that tech lab to the starport once it finishes and go for some type of Banshee harassment, which is fairly effective against Protoss as they have no real detection outside of cannons, which are stationary, until a robotics bay is built, and that costs 100 gas, which kind of, takes a hit on their stalker or sentry production. Now, if we look at the total number of units in each army, right now we do see that the Protoss player technically has about double the supply in army as the Terran player, but neither has really scouted each other. The Protoss player knows that a wall is up in the Terran player's base, as it's pretty much guaranteed that's going to happen. So he knows that the Zealots he has aren't going to be of much use. And here we see the starport swapping with the factory. Let's see what we have. He could be going Banshees with Cloak, or he could be going, I guess, a Raven. No, he's going a Raven. Maybe for point defense versus what is undoubtedly going to be a lot of Stalkers. Protoss player here going for a 3-gate Robo build. Pretty common. Actually, the strategy I prefer against Terran players, as it gives you the support of a Colossus fairly early. Or Immortals, depending on how Marauder heavy the other army is. Switching his factory on to that tech lab at the front. Probably going to be going for the tank upgrade here. Kind of has a mule trap back there. Kind of interesting call down without noticing, apparently. Meanwhile, the Protoss player is getting out his observer to go see the army composition of the other player. Generally a good idea to kind of get a Robo bay out before your third gate, just so you can go scout versus the Terran player, as they're going to be walled off and you're not going to be able to see their army otherwise. Now, what he scouts is going to determine if he's going to go Immortals or Colossi. He goes ahead and throws down a robotics base. It's kind of a slow to build building, and he can always cancel it if he wishes. It's better to lose that little bit of mineral / gas and have that build time ahead. Oh, he sees that the other player has a Raven and quite a few Marines, and beats a hasty retreat as to not lose his observer. The Protoss player has sent a probe to the other side of the map. Looks like he's going to be throwing up a proxy pylon and then returning to his base. Keeping his ground mix fairly even between zealots and stalkers. Always best to keep diverse. Too many stalkers and you're going to have a lot of marauders pushing on you. It looks like, since he saw that the Terran player had more Marines, Zeals are fairly effective against Marines as long as they can get up close, and there's plenty to distract them here. First Colossi coming out here from the Protoss player. The obvious hard counter to a large army of Marines upgraded is a Colossi. You can also go for, or Colossus, you can also go for a High Templar. Not my favorite unit to go for in these situations. If the other player doesn't have a ghost, I generally do not go for a High Templar. The reason why you go for a High Templar when they have a ghost is, of course, to feed back the ghost and kill it instantly and prevent an EMP from getting off on your army. But it doesn't look like the Terran player has opted to go for the EMP. It looks like he's opted to go for a somewhat mech and air support to his ground forces instead of going for a pure ground force versus this Protoss army. Now here the first Colossus is out, so the armies are 2 siege tanks, quite a few Marines, 2 Marauders, 2 Vikings, and a Raven, versus 9 Stalkers, 7 Zealots, and a Colossi, and a Sentry in there to try and absorb some of that damage with Guardian Shield. Extremely effective against Marines in particular, as it takes their 6 damage and lowers it to 4. Looks like the Terran player has upgraded his Marines though. They have shields and a Gauss rifle upgrade. Protoss player has no upgrades at this point. Now the Protoss player hasn't gone for the extended range on the Colossus, as he knows that the Terran is coming over here. We saw him scout, and he's coming over here to kind of scout again. The Terran player has moved up a barracks with his army. This is to try and cover the siege tanks generally, to prevent them from being focus fired. Looks like he's also hiding a point defense drone underneath it. And here we're going to have the battle start up. He probably should have sieged before moving up there and kind of lured them back, but he hasn't. And the siege tanks get set up, get off 1 shot, 2 shots, and are now defeated. The Vikings are focus firing the Colossus, but it's really not going to help when the rest of the army is destroyed. The Protoss player losing very few forces here, about 2 Stalkers and I think 1 Zealot, 1 Zealot, and 2 Colossus. Terran player has a new tank up defending his base, but no real ground force to back that up. Protoss player, of course, pushing as he's won the ground war and knows this is the best time to push before the Terran player is able to rebuild. Taking out the only tank, and the Terran player calls a good game here, as there's not really much he can do at this point in time. So, to review the game, it looks like 3-gate Robo with a Colossus to back it up. Very effective against Terran ground forces, especially with mixes of large amounts of Marines. I would probably go for some Immortals if there was more Marauders in that mix, as they can take the hits better. A lot of Terran players will stim their Marauders and position them to kill the Colossus very quickly when that comes up, and Thermal Lances, while potent against ground forces, aren't quite as potent against Marauders as they are against Marines, as it only takes 2 or 3 hits to kill a Marine, and it takes 5 or so to kill a Marauder. The Terran player went with a 2 barracks, 1 factory, 1 starport build. He looks like he single-based it as well as the Protoss player, both of them not going for expansions, knowing that the Terran player was trying to push early. Marines are generally a good sign that they're going to push early. Siege tank Marine is fairly common. and it's good to get a lot of scouting information. We saw the probe and SCV in the respective other player's base, getting as much information as possible at the beginning of the game, seeing what each person was trying to build up, and then building their armies to try and counter each other a little bit. The Protoss player doing a little bit better job here, though if those siege tanks had been set up just beforehand, they could have done a much better job at kind of sieging their way toward the Terran player's base. It would have been hard for the Protoss player to observe when the siege tanks were unsieging, as he did have a Raven there to prevent an observer from getting close and watching the tanks every move. So that could have been a real advantage in pushing into their base. But he didn't set up in time, and the Protoss player came down the hill and engaged and won that fight. And that was 3-gate Robo versus 2-1-1, which would be 2 barracks, 1 factory, 1 starport. A little bit of a mix, different units to support each other. Protoss versus Terran.